Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. On today's episode, we're joined by dfavors. Don is an automotive technology teacher who spends his days working with students that are preparing to enter the automotive industry. Because he's so close to the next generation of technicians, Don has spent a lot of time thinking about what it takes not only to bring people into the industry, but keep them here. In this conversation, we're going to dig into his perspective on technician retention, the ideas he's been developing around it, and what shop leaders can take away as they think about keeping great people on their teams. Don, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Jay, for having me.
Good. So, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Lowell, Indiana. So I like to think of it as we're at the part where the suburbs of Chicago end and the cornfields begin. So we're the first school that has an ag department as you leave Chicago and Northwest Indiana heading south towards Indy.
Nice. Were
So
you
we're close
raised in
enough.
that area?
Yeah, we're close enough to get to Chicago, where if we need to go, it's like 45 minutes away with the expressway. And but we're just far enough away where we don't have to deal with that urban problems that they have sometimes.
Nice, nice. And is that where you were raised at? Was that area?
Pretty close. I grew up about 25 miles straight west of this, so it's pretty much the same kind of country where I was from. Yeah.
Oh, really, really cool. So, how did you get into this crazy world that is automotive?
Oh, well, interesting story. When I was 15, my brother died in a motorcycle accident, and I inherited his automotive tool set. He had it in high school. He went to auto shop, and so I inherited this real small Mac toolbox full of just the basics. And my brother-in-law worked at for a lawnmower shop, big distribution center with a repair shop. He says, you get your license, you're going to come to work there. So I started to work on lawnmowers, and I've worked on everything from like weed whackers up to international Transtars through my career. And the craziest thing was a gas powered surfboard. I tell the kids about that. They find that interesting. But yeah, so I've had a little bit of everything. When I was in high school, what I did was computers were coming out. I took computer science. I learned about programming. We had a year-long electronics class in high school. So I started my college degree with computer science at Southern Illinois. And I found out that it wasn't quite for me. It wasn't a good fit. I didn't like working in the office scene so much. So I researched what's going to be the best thing to combine my mechanical skills with my electronics knowledge. And with some research with some of the federal information that was out there, I learned that cars were coming out with computerization, and I happened to be at a school that has a great auto program, and it just expanded from there.
Wow. And who would have thought from then to now, the advancements in technology and really even how you started off your education is becoming pretty prevalent in everything that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, the electronics training really helped me out. And, to think of back when we called it, General Motors called it, the second generation was C3, computer controlled carburetor, to the massive, internet type systems that we have integrated with everything in the car. It, uh, it has been quite a ride. I've seen so much technology. And I tell the kids, I said, and you're a generation, even with everything that I've seen, I said, you are going to see some crazy innovation with the cars over this next decade.
Yeah, and it feels like on a day-to-day basis right now, you're seeing some new level of technology introduced into our world, and you're absolutely right. It's going to just continue to get crazier and crazier and crazier. Now, after you got into the industry, how did you kind of take that trip to end up in education? Like, what was it that led you that direction?
Okay, so how I got to education, I spent 35 years in GM dealerships, and my wife came to work for the school system, and she worked in the central office with the administrators. And of course, you attend events with, the district superintendent and director of curriculum. And they were always like, when are we going to get you to come to work for the school system? I'm like, hey, you can't afford me, and I need the money. I've got three kids. My auto insurance payment is more than my house payment right now. I can't afford to go down to a teacher's salary. Well, 25 years goes by, and then pretty soon the job opens up again. And my wife, she didn't ask, she told me, you're applying this time. So here I am at education. But there was always one thing that passed me up. They kind of hinted around before I left college that, maybe it's something you want to stick around for and teach here at the university. But at that time, it just didn't work out. We wanted to move back home to be with family. So that was always that one job that just kind of eluded you, that you always wondered in the back of your mind, what would it have been like if I would have, maybe applied for that job and got it. But my road, the path is what it is, and it's been really interesting teaching high school kids, and I've created a really good program. My I put stickers on my desk to remind me that I'm here to create an opportunity for both students and local business owners, and my job is try to get them connected. Just trying to fill those empty slots.
Oh, and we'll dive really deep into that over the course of the show. But I do have to. I wonder, as I'm talking to you, you had 35 years in dealerships. That is some patience to wait for that job that you kind of had. Really, maybe that interest in. And I in talking to you, just get the sense that you'd be a great teacher in general. Did you feel that when you were in the shop? Like, it was that something that maybe you were helping out with some of the younger techs in the shop, or did you use some of those qualities that make you a great teacher while you were in the shop?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure did. I helped mentor quite a few of the young guys that we hired, trying to get them, up to the rank of journeyman, from being just out of high school. And I'm just somebody who naturally just tries to help out. If I see somebody struggling and I've got the answer for it, I'm not going to just walk right on by. I mean, there's no gain to be had by watching somebody struggle if you've got a quick, easy answer for it. I guess some people want to call it a team player or whatnot, but it's like it's if I can see an avenue to help somebody, that's just what I try to do.
Well, and I think that's what we see from the best mentors in shops, and we'll dive right into this side of what you're talking about, because I think we talk a lot in our industry about how important mentorship is, and making sure that when we put a young person in our shop, that we don't just throw them to the wolves, which I think a lot of times our industry has done over the years, and it doesn't end up in that young person succeeding in our industry. And the power of a good mentor and somebody that wants to truly help you out is invaluable. It really, really is. And I feel like our industry maybe lacks that a little bit. There are some great mentors in our industry, do not get me wrong, but there are also a lot of shops that just kind of miss that part, aren't there? I mean, it feels like there's a lack of mentors across the industry.
That's true. And as I go around and make connections throughout the year with the different shops locally, I have two shops that have a really good mentor program, and they don't have a retention problem. What they have is an expansion problem as they increase in market share, because they're, in part because of the service department improvements. The longer you keep somebody, the better they get, and the better, the higher customer satisfaction goes. And then you have the flip side of that. You have the dealerships that grind through entry level techs, and they're in and out and gone in no time, and they're calling for more. And I'm like, you just got a good kid, and you just ground them out. You just shoot them up. So yeah,
Yeah.
it really has a lot to do with. I think with customer satisfaction, and then in turn with repeat sales after that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and that I think leads us really nicely into. And I don't want to skip steps on your pathway to retention, because I think it's really important to kind of talk through what you're building here. But as I'm looking at this, and I kind of view it as almost like a white paper, and there's a lot of information in there as I read through it. What what made you want to write out a plan for a path to retention? Because I read through it; it's very detailed, very good information in it. But what was the driving factor to say, hey, I'm going to spend all this time writing this out?
That's interesting. It's something that was more of a feeling at first, but I think the feeling was is I'm training these kids up and putting them in jobs only to watch them get ground up and spit out. So it's like, what can I do to get some information out there to increase that, that 2 year failure rate of approximately 50%. I think it's getting a little bit better. I think we're down into maybe the lower 40s in the auto sector, but it's something. It's like I felt like if I'm working so hard to try and train these kids up, if they're not doing their side on the business side of it, if there's something that I can do to try to help that situation out, then why not? If not me, then who is kind of the question.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to lay out the 5 steps here. So then we can kind of go through each one and talk a little bit about each one, because I think it's really smart. I couldn't agree more with you. I think some of the issues we have with, and my buddy George Ahrens, I'll give him a shout out from ASE, talks about eating our young and how we are really, really guilty of that as an industry. And in order for us to kind of change our luck, we need to attack this a little better, right? We need to take this a little bit more seriously. And the 5 steps you have laid out, the first one being recruiting and hiring. Second, connecting with local secondary and post-secondary education. The third is an entry-level new hire startup. The fourth step is structured mentorship program. So I kind of skipped ahead there a little bit, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the
Sure.
fifth step, and one that I think is really underrated, is that financial education piece. I do think this has a big weight on a young person, or carries a big weight on a young person that might force them to look in a different direction. So let's start with recruiting and hiring. What is different about what you're talking about with recruiting and hiring versus what you actually see being done in shops?
Well, there were times where I saw the big need to get a lube tech. We were shorthanded, at the dealership, and a kid would walk in and he had an interview that was maybe less than 5 minutes long. And next thing you know, he's rolling in, some set of tools, and here you go, train him up. And it's like, okay. So you try to quickly assess the kid and help him out, and watch this, and then in a couple of days we'll have you start working on your own. But so many of those kids just didn't make it. We didn't do a good enough venting or interview process, asking thorough enough questions to see if they were in fact even capable of working at a high level, at a dealership. So they weren't capable of handling that stress or the accuracy that was required at a setting like that. So there was no amount of help that was going to get them if they didn't want to train themselves as well. Also, it just wasn't a good fit. And the old saying that I had read and heard several times was, it's not enough to get somebody on the bus. You got to get the right person on the bus, and even that's not good enough. You got to get the right person on the right bus and in the right seat. So that was one of the things that I thought, if we could improve upon that initial interview process with different style of questions, even going to the extent of maybe just having them do a simple test to see what their basic skills are. Not all auto programs are at a high level, and not every student, graduates with an A. I have some kids that are excellent. They go out and they just kill it. They just do a fantastic job. And I have some kids that, they're high school kids. They just kind of lazily go through, and when they're done, if they can't find anything else, they think, well, there's an open job for a lube tech, I'll go give it a shot. And it's like, well, okay, but not quite for sure if you're going to be able to handle that or not, but good luck.
I think you're spot on. And this is something I've talked a lot about, where we spend so little time in the process up front to understand if a student is the right fit for our shop. And I think that has led to a lot of attrition in our industry. And I think a lot of it has come from the point of being desperate, right? A lot of shops are desperate to find people to come into their shops. And as soon as they as soon as they hear from somebody that's interested in the industry, they sign them up. Let's bring them in and let's throw them on our path, which a lot of times that path is throw them out in the shop and say good luck, and that doesn't work out very well. And so I love the fact that you have taken the time to think through that piece of it, because I think a lot of shops could learn from that. And for you shops that are out there, this is an excellent opportunity to learn from an educator that spent a lot of time in your shoes to be able to actually take it seriously. And I always talk about how one of the more heartbreaking things that I see in our industry is that early stage attrition, because it's not just the fact that they aren't going to stick around in the industry. A lot of times they went and spent lots of money on education.
Yeah.
They spent lots of money on tools. They spent a lot of money on a lot of things that, had they known that this wasn't going to be a good fit for them, that they probably wouldn't have, and now have put themselves in a worse position starting off their lives. And I think we're doing a disservice to those folks, right? That really, we need to be a little bit more candid with them. We need to be a little bit more diligent up front. And just because somebody shows some level of interest in our shop doesn't necessarily mean they're a good fit. And sometimes I don't think we take it seriously enough, right? If it's a young person coming in our shop doors, we treat it differently a lot of times than if we were to hire a more experienced technician. But if you think about the amount of time, effort, money, everything, all the amount of effort in general that goes into a young person and getting them to be a good technician for you, it's a lot. And if you don't take that seriously, you're going to waste a lot of time, money, effort, and end up even more frustrated at the end if you don't take it a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, the cost of training up a tech is just incredibly high anymore, and it's one of the things I would like to see probably improve is the ability to get some part-time experience for these kids before they make a huge decision like that. So a lot of times I try to get the kids, even if it's on a wash rack, because that's normally open later in the evening, at least they get to see what's going on in a shop and get a little bit of a view of some of that, and they get a little taste of interacting with everybody. But yeah, it's definitely I'd sure like to see it where they, before spending just an incredible amount of money on everything, that they have something to base that decision on. But what I get coming into my classroom is this: if I get a kid whose dad works on stuff, maybe he's a farmer and they work on the equipment and the tractors and everything else, or if his dad's in some kind of a repair business or that, they come in, it's like a breath of fresh air. They know what tools are. But I've got kids who come in and they can't identify a flat blade screwdriver from a pair of pliers, literally. And we're going to take them, we're going to get them a lot of knowledge. We can get them some minor amount of experience with the amount of time that I have them. But that's the thing that they really lack, is they have this raw knowledge, but they don't have that hands-on experience. It's not, when I was like nine or 10, my brother-in-law got me a little mini bike, and I rode that thing like I was mad at it all the time. And of course you break it, and Dad says, fine, I'm tired of fixing it. You fix it, if you want to keep riding. And that's kind of like how it kind of like starts with a lot of kids that start early on. But we've made the car so complicated, dads don't even pop the hood anymore,
Right.
so they're not getting to see any repair done at home. I'm the kid that had to hold the flashlight while Dad was bleeding brakes, and I'm pumping the pedal and stuff like that. I came up from that era.
If you're an automotive, diesel, or collision instructor, or an educator helping students explore these careers, this is for you. Building relationships with local shops takes time, and knowing who's willing to help isn't always clear. ASE Connects, in partnership with WrenchWay, brings schools and industry together on one easy online platform at no cost for schools. At the heart of ASE Connects is School Assist, the online resource that lets you post exactly what your program needs. From guest speakers, shop tours, tools, advisory committee members, career fair participants, and even student job opportunities, shops can see your requests and respond directly to you. You'll also get access to instructor-focused resources, webinars, and templates designed to save time and strengthen industry partnerships. Even if your school doesn't have a formal auto or diesel program, you can still participate to help connect interested students with real-world opportunities. ASE Connects is free for schools. Get started at wrenchway.com/solutions/schools or use the link in the show notes. Are there opportunities for a young person to be able to tear into things without, the threat of potentially ruining it and not being able to drive home their own vehicle or something like that? I just feel like there is something missing there. And maybe, you look to like Legos. I know I've got a 9-year-old son who loves Legos, loves tinkering with Legos. And then, almost a stair step approach, a little bit of, then you start to introduce some mechanical things and really trying to get them to understand how things work. But there are times where even like modern day lawnmowers aren't as basic as they used to be, right? Where you can just tear into them and try to learn some things. Where do you see opportunities for a young person to kind of learn and discover and just be curious?
Sure. I remember also, as a kid, putting together the Revel cars,
Yeah.
the plastic cars. And so I thought about maybe doing something like that over at the middle school as a club activity for however many weeks it takes to put one of those together anymore. And then either that or see if I can get some contributions from some of the local businesses to do maybe an RC car club or do both. Maybe have the kit cars for seventh grade and then maybe eighth grade do the RC cars because if you drive them like you're mad at them, they break and you got to fix them and everything else. So they'll learn some basic stuff with tools and everything and how suspension works and maybe a little bit of the electric drivetrain, how that works. So that's something I've been kind of playing around with, but I quite frankly don't have the money or the time currently to do that. So that's something that whenever I do retire, maybe it's something I try to do some volunteer work with the school to try to help feed the program. They do have a
We're not.
robotics club, but
Oh,
those are more of the STEM students that are probably more gearing more towards an engineering degree. Those are high level math science kids at the middle school, and they normally get put on track to go into the college track at the high school.
don't you get the sense that we're going to need some of those kids in our industry?
Oh yeah,
You think about it, and that's how when I was raised in this industry, it was you're kind of a back of classroom kid that and maybe didn't have other paths to go. And I think as technologically advanced as our industry is heading, I think we do need to appeal to even more, right? We need more than just the ones that are mechanically capable. Just being able to reach one of those kids or one of those students and say, "Listen, you want to go down this path. Well, here's a whole bunch of what you're looking for in your backyard, right? Like this is
yeah,
a lot of very complicated stuff, and getting a student like that exposed to some of the service information or some of the I'm just thinking of ways to stoke that brain in curiosity to what we have to offer, because I do think there's a lot of potential for a student with that aptitude to be able to come into our industry and really make some waves.
yeah. I mean, if we could attract some of the students that are maybe college bound, but maybe they're going to have a hard time with the high level math that might be required with something. This would be a perfect fit for some of the kids that are going to go in that could go into this, make a tremendous amount of money
Mhm.
working on the high tech portion of the cars. They really could. That's kind of like the path that was on is I was in computer science and I was good at programming, but that high level math just wasn't going to work out for me either. But you don't have to do a lot of math working on a car. But that type of analytical thinking is what gets you into that diagnostic process. And then also that type of memory can get you the memory of the procedures that once you do a job 2 or 3 times, you're getting to the point where you're going to beat that flat rate time.
Yeah, I just came back from the Vision High Tech conference in Kansas City a couple weeks ago, and talking to some of the technicians there that were going through training, they talked about the importance of, they're diving into programming, right? They're talking into or they're talking about some very advanced level stuff. And they had we actually just had a teacher on that will be on another episode of Beyond the Wrench here soon, that was working with some software and being able to program cars and doing some really cool stuff with it. And so, and that was, he ran an HP tuners class down there. And you talk about ways to attract a student that, really does have that ability to think through problems, being able to give them an HP tuner and being able to tune a car and play with it and kind of see what that does to the performance. And I just think the opportunities are endless. And if you can start to stoke that fire with something that is something they can tinker with, and tinkering looks a little different now, right? It might look a little different than what it did when we were growing up, where if they can hop on their computer and screw around with the parameters and be able to really finely tune their automobile and see the performance results that it has almost instantaneously, I think there's a lot we've got in this industry to offer that could really get that young person thinking differently about a career path going into our industry.
Yeah, back in the day when I grew up, it was messing around, maybe putting a cam in, playing around with the carburetor, the ignition timing, maybe a higher stall converter. And now it's the kid's going to be looking at, to improving the performance, is playing around with a laptop to getting a lot more out of the car. So yeah, the electronics is definitely something that could attract some higher level thinkers, where they're capable of that analytical thinking and following the details of very precise diagnostic flowcharts.
Yeah, it gets very, very complicated. Now, going back to your 5 steps, the one last piece I wanted to mention that I really liked about what you had written out, excuse me, was when you have that initial question, which is ask yourself, what position are you looking for? And you broke it down between, are you actually looking for a lube tech, or are you looking for somebody that could maybe start as a lube tech, but then you want them to grow through an apprenticeship program? Talk to me about that a little bit, and the understanding of just being able to ask that first question.
Sure. I mean, it's something that the interviewer is going to have to try to determine. I mean, what is it that he actually wants? A lot of these big dealerships, or even the smaller ones, they're looking to run a quick lube type rack. They have, it's the number one job in most of the dealerships is the oil change still. So if they're looking for somebody that's going to be able to stay on that lube rack permanently and be highly trained just for that process, and which I had some techs that I worked with that were really good on the lube rack. Louis, he was 50 years old, and he had 2 stalls, and one was going up and one was coming down, and that guy would make between 35 and 50 hours a week just on the lube rack. So I mean, if you're looking for somebody who's going to be permanently on there, that's fine. You have to be honest with the interview, but if you're actually looking for somebody who's going to turn into a journeyman, that would be another story. You could take a kid that maybe only passed a couple of the entry-level ASEs in my class, and he's got a pretty good grasp on most everything. He could maybe make an incredibly successful lube rack tech. But if you're looking for somebody who's passed every entry-level ASE test in class, hammers out work in here, he plans on maybe going to a local community college and work at the dealership at the same time, He's got bigger aspirations than staying on the lube rack. He wants to be a journeyman. So if you hire him for the lube rack without any thought as to what the next steps are going to be for that kid, you're not going to keep him. And he's going to go someplace who's going to recognize that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just being able to lay out that path, I do think there are students that don't mind being on the lube rack as long as they have an idea of what their path is leading to, right? And if
Right.
it's the better it's laid out. I always refer back to Ed Roberts at Bozard Ford down in Florida, where he's got an excellent system with that, where he is putting them in a lube rack to start off with. And a lot of times they're not even coming just directly out of school. It could be somebody that had some life experience already and they wanted to change their path. They go and kind of earn their stripes in that lube rack with the understanding that we've got a program that you're working your way into, but you almost have to prove yourself to get into that program. And it's got such a good reputation that I think he's got a line of people that are trying to constantly get into that program. So, I think it is just like anybody for young people, especially, they want to know what the path is. They want to know that there is room to grow. And when I say they, I shouldn't put them all in that bucket, right? There's maybe some that are just happy to go in, put in their time and leave at the end of the day. But I think for those high achieving students that are looking for that career path, and even if it's something where they're just trying to justify it to their parents, right? Like, hey, they've got this laid out for me. That might help them sell it to their family as well. So I think there's a lot of value in what you have to say there.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I changed from computer science to the auto program. My mom was not happy with that, and my dad was questioning me. He says, "All right, I trust you." And then I finally one day I told my mom how much I made. She goes, "Excuse me." Yeah, mom, I make more than programmers do by a lot, I said, so I'm really good at my job. But, it was even funny though, I couldn't get over to take care of my mom's basic maintenance. And so she went to the local quick lube place and they said, I need this and I need that. And I said, Mom, are you going to trust me? You're going to trust the lube rack guy? Come on, I've got 2 college degrees and a lifetime in the business. Your car's fine. You got 20,000 miles on it. You don't need anything yet. So it's always funny, the parental pressure. And I had a really talented young man that on parent teacher conference night, I sent them an email and said, I'd like to have a double slot for you guys and like to talk to you about, the potential that this young man has in this business. And they were all real impressed with everything. But then they were like, but the statistics show that the income level is capped at about 50. I said, yeah, but that also includes all of the lube techs at the quick lube places and everything else. I said, if you remove that out, I said, your son's within the first 5 years is easily going to be a 6-figure tech. He's going to be able to do that. I said, you have to trust me. I said, I hadn't made $50,000 a year since I got into the business. I said, he's going to be fine. So I got him into, the place where I came from, and he's just doing fantastic. Of course, he's doing all his training. He's got a mentor. He's on track with all the training. He's part-time with the local community college, so he's going to walk away with his associate's degree. So, I mean, he's on track to be a highly successful tech.
That stats piece really drives me crazy. We put together a salary tool for WrenchWay where and it's part of this new ASE Connects program because of that very reason, right?
Yeah.
Because if I were a parent and I was looking at this industry and maybe I didn't have familiarity with it, and I looked at how low the start that not just the starting salary, but like what the Bureau of Labor Statistics has laid out for high earning individuals in our industry, it's wildly inaccurate. It's not even close. And we had actually met with the Bureau of Labor Statistics folks, and they laid out the model for us. They were very open, they were very nice. But when we heard kind of what the model looked like, it really made us question that altogether, right? And how they put that together. So we developed a tool, and it's part of our kind of new data exchange, industry data exchange, that I think is really we already have schools using it on their site. So we give them the code to be able to put it onto their website. And it was for that very reason right there,
Mhm.
because we need to give them good information back. We also have to be realistic in that, I think at times we don't want to overemphasize how much they can make because we don't want them to come in that first couple of years and be disappointed when they're not making six figures right out of school. We want to be honest with them and say, okay, this is what your potential is. But again, going back to the roadmap and being able to kind of paint that picture to show them that you can make a really good living with this. And if you're good, this will pay off tenfold. You'll be in really, really good shape. So I just think the more we can provide that transparency, especially to parents, and just making sure that we're giving them all that information up front. Because if I looked at it from an outsider's view and in a perspective where if the top earning folks are I think the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics says it is that the top 10% of earners make like 80 grand a year or something. And we're like, that's not right. Like that is not right at all. But if you're a parent and you see that along with the tool investment needed, and then you see all the negativity online about our industry, then that position specifically, I think most parents would be crazy to send their kids into this industry. So we I think have to take that part really seriously.
Yeah, we've got that all across the trades, but we've got this fantastic trades building that includes precision machining, welding, and construction. We have other trades as well in the main school building, but we're always fighting that misperception. And I always tell the parents, I said, look, I can't guarantee your kid's going to be making six figures in 5 years. I said it's going to be all up to him. If he does the training, he does the work, and he puts in the time, I said that's what his potential will be in about 5 years, working in the more urban area of our vicinity. And I said so it really comes down to them. So and like going back to the lubrac techs, I have some kids that they don't think that they want the stress of being a journeyman tech. So, but they like the idea of maybe just being the lube tech. And so, those positions should be able to, try to get them together and match them up. Like I said, I had that guy that I worked with that his two stalls were, in opposite directions on a constant basis. It can be done where you can make good money on the lube rack.
I once had a dealer principal tell me he had a lube tech that was really, really good. And he said that is one of the most key positions in our entire dealership because of their ability to do some inspections and their ability to just kind of have everything kind of run through them and just basically saying that person touches more cars than anybody else in the dealership on any given day. And it's a vital piece to what we do every day. So there's definitely value in that position for sure.
Yeah, I've always said that that's three positions at the dealership that really have a lot of impact is going to be the service advisor, the lube tech, and the cashier because they have more contact with the customer than anybody else.
Absolutely. This week's episode of Beyond the Wrench is brought to us by Jasper Engines and Transmissions. Okay, your customer's engine or transmission has failed, but now is not the time for them to trade their vehicle. Not without a working engine or transmission. Besides, would they have kept their vehicle another 3 to 5 years if their engine or transmission had not let them down? If you answered yes, then Jasper Engines and Transmissions is your choice to give your customer's vehicle new life and many thousands of miles of enjoyable driving performance. When considering the high cost of a new or newer used vehicle, there's a pretty good case to be made for replacing a drivetrain component that has failed or is delivering poor performance. Rather than trading their car, truck, van, or SUV, install a quality remanufactured Jasper product for less than your customer would have to invest in a new vehicle or a newer used vehicle. Check out their website at jasperengines.com to learn more about the money-saving value of Jasper. Now, the second step in your 5 steps to retention, connecting with local secondary and post-secondary education, how does that lead to more retention?
Okay, so if recruiting the right person, it's going to kind of play into a little bit more with the recruiting the right person as well. But if the dealer sends somebody down, whether it be a tech or a service manager or a director to stop in and the kids see their face. Maybe they do a presentation on new technology of a car, or they help out with something in the lab, or like I just had a career day for all of the local auto programs for just the transportation trades. If they show up to that, the kids recognize their face, they get to work with them, talk with them, interact with them, and everything. And it just leads to drawing some of our higher ability students, because our competition anymore really isn't from independent to dealer or from dealer to dealer. Our big competition is, and I do this with the tour of our building all the time, our competition is that whole east side of the building with precision machining and welding and construction and all these other organized unions that have these really polished recruiting and mentorship programs. And that's our competition. And I have had some incredible students in the auto program, and they choose something like welding or construction.
Yeah. I had somebody just recently tell me that they're, from an educator standpoint, they don't view the 4-year schools as the competition anymore. They view it as the other trades, the other skilled
Yeah.
trades. And I think they're absolutely right that there are people that are still obviously going to 4-year schools, and they should. But when you look at that young person that's got the talent and really going to be in the skilled trades, you want to make sure it's our skilled trade, right? You want to make sure
Right.
that they're going into our world. So I think that's a great perspective, and one that's very, very real.
That and this generation seems to be, for whatever reason, we could blame it on COVID if you want, or the electronics. It doesn't matter what the reason or the cause is. They have a tendency to be a little bit more introverted. Uh, but when they're within their group, they're very outgoing with people that they know. So if we could get some interaction in the schools where they actually show up and see some FaceTime, then that comfort is raised where they can
Mm.
approach them and speak to them in a more comfortable manner. I mean, also, it would be great if they want a better prepared tech. To hit the floor when they get there, to tell us what you actually want us to teach here at the high school, or college level, trade school,
Hmm.
whatever it might be. Have some interaction, show up to the advisory committee meetings, and put in your 2 cents and tell us what you really want. Otherwise, we're following the ASE program. I got state standards to hit. I have dual credit standards I have to hit. I'm trying to hit all of that. And if you've got something that you really want us to teach, I need to know what it is.
Yeah. And going into those conversations from an industry perspective, this is something I've always taken pride in being able to do in going into a school, is just being able to give feedback of what a current day shop looks like, right? And being able to help, I think, get on the same page as the school, because if you know what they're teaching and you are working toward our next point, which is going to be some of that mentorship and that really that onboarding from an early stage. You have it stated as entry level, new hire, startup. But if you're on the same page there and hey, the school's going to bring that student up to this point,
Mm-hmm.
this is where the shop needs to take them and really start to kind of build on that. And not, I think at times, even out of high school programs, you'll get shops that just because a student went through an automotive program thinks they're going to walk in their doors and light the world on fire right off the bat. And you're like, no, like this
Yeah,
tells me you
yeah,
have not spent any time in a school, because I
right.
don't know any educators that are saying we're giving you polished A-level technicians out of school. And if they are, I'd probably question them. But I think that's the impact of being involved in a school, is you understand what the school is teaching and what level they're getting them to, and then hopefully then the shop is taking them from that stage and building them up from there. So I love that point.
Yeah, there's definitely a gap in that. I tell them a lot of times when I visit, it's like, oh, wait a second, I don't have kids 8 hours a day. At best, there are days where I get them for two, sometimes an hour and a half, and sometimes just for 45 minutes. So the amount that I can actually pack in on these days with this spotty schedule of trying to fit in hands-on, some larger things on the 2-hour days, and maybe cover a chapter on a 45-minute day. It's really difficult trying to put it all together and trying to get a kid who's job ready.
Yeah.
Our kids even have the ability to do, because we're ASE accredited. They can do GM training, they can do Ford training. Hyundai has training available. Navistar has training available. And every once in a while, you get a kid that's really hot and going into one particular brand, and they'll take advantage of it. But it's difficult to get the kid to jump into doing extra work on top of everything else, because you got to remember they got to do language arts, they got science class, they've got other classes that they're doing, and then on top of that, they're still high school kids. They try to figure out what are they going to do this weekend when they all get together. That's the thing.
I couldn't agree more. Now, let's talk through that third step a little bit in a little bit more detail, because the onboarding piece, and as I mentioned, the entry level new hire startup, as you have it phrased, I think is something a lot of shops just straight up miss on, right? Like they really, really struggle with this piece. What are your thoughts on that side?
Yeah, I thought of this based on every time I moved up. I did some gas station work back when they still had stalls at the gas station whenever I was in college, and then when I got out of college, I started at a dealership, and there was 7 techs there. So I mean, it was kind of a small shop compared to some, but that was moving up such a big level from working at a gas station was very intimidating. And once again, even though I was ASE Master Tech and I'd been working on cars for a couple of years, I couldn't have felt more stupid if I had to. And of course, the guys on the first day, they're busting my chops right off the get-go in the first 2 hours that I'm there. Of course, I'd been in shop since I was 16, so it was no big deal. And I gave it back to them in the afternoon, and they were like, "All right, kid, you might just make it." Even though I was 24, you're the kid because you're
Oh
new.
yeah.
But it's and then of course when I went to the really big dealership, it was very intimidating going around. You meet everybody. Of course, you can't remember anybody's names, and then you go into the parts department, and it's the biggest parts department in Northwest Indiana, and there's 8 guys in there, and it's just like you can't remember anybody's names. It's just so intimidating getting into a situation like that. And if we could just simply get them through the first few days, have an easier onboarding process where they just basically job shadow maybe a senior tech before they move on to doing a job shadow on the lube rack. Just slow that process down just a little bit. Make them feel like they're part of the group before you say, okay, it's time to start cranking out some work.
Oh, I love that. And I would add there, if you can get them a chance to sit with a service advisor, service writer, and maybe even the service manager, and really try to build that relationship early, I think you're going to have even more familiarity with what the front office is doing and a comfort level. I think we all remember when we were young and starting out, like how intimidating it was to maybe talk to a manager and even just feel comfortable around them, right? A lot of times you're almost sweating from just having that conversation. And at least that was my experience. And I think you could do a lot to kind of relax that a little bit, right? To where it is them understanding, hey, this is just a person and you can have a good conversation with them and probably learn some things from them.
Right. The transportation trades day, the career fair just for transportation with the other schools, and have the different speakers come up and interview them this year, a little bit of a different format for the roundtable. And basically, I would tell them, look, this person was sitting in your shoes, albeit a long time ago, but they get up in the morning and put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you do. I said, but the problem is they probably eat breakfast before they go to, work. And I said, you guys roll out, put your pants on and come straight to school. I said, but they're just regular people. They're just regular people. And you just got to talk to them. I said, don't be intimidated. I said, they're more than happy to talk to you and ask them questions. I said, ask them all this. how'd you get started? What was your path? Tell me what it was like when you got going in the business. And so that was the theme this year. It was like the first 2 years, what was it like when you got going and what did you do to move up?
Yeah. And I'm sure for anybody that gets asked that in a shop atmosphere is probably feels pretty good that somebody wants to know how you got to where you're going.
Mhm.
And, I think the one key element that I would mention there is you have to make sure when they're going in, and maybe this can lead really nicely into the fourth step, which is the mentorship side, is making sure you're getting with the right people in the shop, right? Because there can be people in our shops that will tell that young person, do not come into this industry. We don't want you in this, like you shouldn't come into this industry. And we hear that story all the time from young people, right? Like they'll go into a shop and, you've got that kind of old grumpy guy sitting in the corner that's just complaining about everything and telling the young person like run as fast as you can. And, I there are reasons some of those more experienced techs have that to say, and some of them are rightful in what they're saying. Maybe they haven't been treated the best over the course of their career, but I've seen way too many good technicians over the years that love their job but just don't speak, on a public forum about it.
Yes.
And when you talk about mentorship, I just think that part is really, really key, is to make sure that they find the right mentor and somebody that's going to encourage them and help them understand the industry, and not just put down the industry, because that's just miserable to be around.
Yeah, I worked with one guy who was excellent at teaching these young men who had some good quality skills on how to get out the door. And it's just like, man, he is so good at just getting these kids to leave. He should just be put in a corner. He's a really good tech. He just shouldn't interact with the young people that come in. But I really drill it into these kids. I said, look, these guys are just professionals at complaining. They can really fix cars, so there's a place for them in the business. I said, but their level to complain about everything is like a 12 on a scale to 10. I said, what you need to ask them if they're complaining so much is ask them, how's that house? How's that second house that you have, that maybe the one that's on the lake, or your boat, or your car that only comes out on sunshine days? I said, these guys are doing really well. They're just good at complaining, and you just have to look past that. I said, so that comes into like the sarcasm training that we try to give here in our trades building. You know,
I
One teacher calls it the building of truth and sarcasm. So I call it my program is a 3-year program. So if when you're in the first year, it's sarcasm 101, and then if you graduate to the second year, you get sarcasm, second 200 level. And then if you got me for 3 years, I tell them, if you got me for 3 years, if your feelings can get hurt, I have not done my job. I said, you just got to use it. It's a different environment working in there. I said, nobody cares about your feelings. I said, they're just, it's just words. So you just go out, do your job, and make your money. I said, there's nothing wrong with it. I said, these guys are just really good at complaining.
I could not love that anymore. And the sarcasm piece, I think, relates so much with young people and anybody. Like if you can get them to loosen up and kind of get that sarcasm, it just makes everything way more fun. And yeah, I know my dad had a sign. This tells you how I was raised, which was he had a sign out at his own shop, like he's got his own kind of hobby shop, and uh, that he has on the side, and he's got some cartoon from something way back when that said, "I want you to know that someone cares," and then it goes below and it says, "It's not me, but somebody probably does care." It's just something like that. So there's yeah, that sarcasm it runs deep in my bloodline for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, we have to train them for the environment that they're going to go into.
Yeah.
Not everything is politically correct out there, and we just have to understand that. And tell the kids, I said, look, one of these days, it's going to be you giving the kid, a little bit of a hard time. When I was 16, at the lawnmower shop, probably one of the smartest mechanical minds I've ever worked with in all of my years. But anytime I would mess up, he goes, kids these days, you give them books, you send them to school, you teach them everything you know, and then he looks at you and goes, and this is what you get. Come on, I'm trying. I probably heard that probably 50 times that summer, but it was like, sooner or later you just learn.
Well, I think there's value in understanding how to take that sarcasm too, right?
Oh
Where
yeah.
if you're that young person in a shop, don't take it too personally. Like that
Right.
you'll hear some of that stuff from time to time, and uh, they say you've got to have thick skin. I think it's more so just like understanding people's personalities, and when you're
Right.
young, maybe you haven't seen all of those different personalities yet, and people have different humor and different ways of going about things, and if you understand that and kind of roll with the punches, I think you're going to be a lot happier. You're going to let things go a lot easier, and I do think that's really important. Now, the the fifth thing that you've got here is one that I think is so important, which is financial
Mhm.
education,
Yeah.
and something I don't think we do much of in our industry at all. But walk me through that. Why is that important to you?
Oh man, I can't tell you how many times I've seen a lube tech start, and after 30 or 60, 90 days of being there, he's got about enough tools that you could hold like this in your arms. And the next thing you know, he's coming off the tool truck and he's got this massive roll cabinet, He doesn't even have enough tools to fill one drawer of it, and I'm like, "Oh,
Why are
dude,
you doing that?
you're not going to have anything left. All your money's going to go to pay for the toolbox." I said, "How many times have I told you the toolbox doesn't earn you any money?" Which I kind of reformulated that because we had all of our tools ripped off at the dealership one time. I'm like, all right, the toolbox has to keep tools in the box, but it doesn't earn you any money other than the fact that it's going to organize and keep them in your box. You need tools first. And so now they're buried and they're like, I'm not making any money. You're making money, but you're spending too much money. And I can't tell you how many years I went where I was strung out, as being a new father, trying to turn, flat rate times and everything else, but I didn't have a savings account. And once to speak of,
Right.
to compensate for those bad weeks. And so, when something happens and you get a couple of bad jobs in a row, it's a crisis. And so, if we can teach them, you just get this small little savings account. It's not, I'm going to buy parts for my car account. It's not that I'm going to, go out and have a good weekend, or it's not a vacation account. It's for bad weeks or a bad month, for crying out loud. They happen. If you have that money, then the stress is just gone. But if we can get them going in this business without getting buried with tool purchases, um, at least for maybe like the first 6 months, maybe to see, is this something that you really want to do? So I tell my kids, I said, Harbor Freight or anything like that, it's not a bad idea. And I said, worst case scenario, you stay in the business, you end up replacing all of these, but you take those tools home to use whenever you're around the house. And I said, so they're not going to go to waste. They're definitely not something you can use on a professional level day in and day out. If you're going to really beat them up pretty hard, you're going to need some top level tools eventually. But let's get into it in a smart way so you still have money along your path, and then help teach them, about saving for retirement, saving for your big purchases like a car or, anything else, and having those different accounts as you do. But I tell them, as soon as you can get into taking advantage of some type of a retirement plan where they might match funds, you got to spend that money and allocate that to do that, because your body's a ticking clock. And once you're going to get to your mid 50s, you might just find yourself where an opportunity comes up and you can go and teach at a high school. It could happen.
It's really good advice, and I've put people on to and just suggested, but whether they're going to check out a Dave Ramsey class or read a Dave Ramsey
Right.
book, some type of financial planning book, or a lot of times maybe a church will put on a class, or just
Mhm.
look out. There are so many resources now where you can educate yourself financially, and I think for young people that's really really important. But then for the shops that are out there, I've heard more and more that are bringing in financial advisors to talk to their teams, or they're bringing in folks that can train them on that very topic. And I think as it relates to a young person, my goodness, I love that. I really really wish more and more shops would take the time to help educate their people. I think what they'd find is less people leaving for a dollar or two, right? Like I think there are people that make those moves out of necessity. Whereas if you could help educate them a little bit better, maybe that would help to keep your people around.
Yeah, the dealership where I spent 30 years at, it was a fantastic place to work. Still is. Um, and we could have easily have gone to some other local dealerships and made that extra dollar or two per booked hour, but you didn't do it because it was such a great place to work. It was, I think what we need to do in some aspect is we need to take management training and we need to incorporate leadership training with that.
Yes.
It's not enough to just dot the i's and cross the t's. We gotta get some leadership type training for service management, dispatchers, anybody in those positions where they can that interact with the techs, other than just a service advisor capacity. If you're more than just a service advisor, there should be some type of leadership activity, whether it be something simple like a Maxwell program, or even
Yeah.
like Les Brown videos, or anything like that. There's so much of that out there. Uh, it's like putting dessert on the end of a good meal, and it starts to create that team and type feeling or family type feeling, and people aren't going to leave you at that point for a buck or two, because this is a good place to work and you know that it's going to be long sustaining.
I could talk on this topic for days. I
Yeah.
think this has been just reading through all the thought that you've put into this is really cool. And I hope you keep building on this, because I think what you're putting together is really important for industry to understand, and just absolutely love what you're putting together here. So uh, before we end, I do have a few quick hitting questions for you that are just kind of fun questions that we like to ask our guests. So the first is, what was your first car?
Oh, my first car, the one that I owned. Um, my dad let me drive his pickup truck at first, but then the oil embargo hit, and I couldn't afford my part-time job. Wasn't enough to pay for the gas to get there and back. So he says, "All right, Grandma's going to be done driving." So it was a 1970 Ford Maverick with a
Nice.
170 straight six in it, and that car maxed out at 70 miles an hour. It would not go 71. That was hammered to the floor, man. And I had a friend with a Gremlin, and he was chasing me on this backcountry road, so I floored it. I was on my way home, and he only lived a couple miles from me, so he's trying to catch me, and I can't pull away, and he can't catch up. I pull into the driveway, and he comes in, like 10 seconds later, and I got out, walked to him. I said, "We never tell anybody about this race."
And here we are talking about it publicly.
Yeah, yeah, I probably should.
Uh, what's your favorite type of food?
Oh, favorite type of food. Wow. Well, my son makes a really mean barbecue. He's got one of those fancy smokers, and he's always trying something different with that. So, just good home barbecue is probably the best. But then, other than that, um, something that I cook for myself, and if you're an outdoorsman, you're gonna like this. And that's shore lunch on a lake in Minnesota for something that you just caught maybe just a few minutes beforehand.
Very cool. I like both of those answers. That's really cool. Last question. Do you have a particular time that you wake up in the morning?
Oh yeah, uh, 5 o'clock, and if I miss it, my dog makes sure that I don't.
The best alarm clock you can get.
Yeah, yeah. On the weekends, there ain't no sleeping in. He's like, so sometimes he's a pretty smart dog. So sometimes I'll go to him, look, Nitro, we're going to sleep in tomorrow. And he might let me get till 6 o'clock, but then he's like, he's got that nose poking in you. It's like, come on, old man, we both have to go pee.
Oh, well, what a fun conversation. How do we follow along with what you're doing with your work here? Like what is a good way? Maybe we'll have you back on the podcast at some point in the future. That'd be really cool. But what is your hope with this? How do you kind of educate your shops and trying to make sure that they're following along with your program?
Oh, this is pretty new. I came out with a short version of this. It was just a 2-page document. I called it Pathway to Retention. And I happen to have somebody on my board, that advisory board, that has already, he had this on here before he came to my board, and he just has, really good results with it. But I don't know where I'm going to go with this. I'm going to keep working on it, but I'm not quite for sure how to present it out to anybody just yet. So, I'm open to new ideas, but other than emailing me here at the school, I'm so busy just trying to keep my head afloat teaching the kids. I keep working on this. It's got to be like 50 pages or something like that, but
Oh,
I'm
it's
not quite
great
sure
too.
how to get it out to other people other than printing it out to them and talking to some of the local service directors and managers.
I hope we're able to kind of spread the word about this a little bit more, just because it is great work. And I think there are so many things that you've learned between your 35 years in a shop and then your time in education, that there's value in seeing both sides of the equation, right? And you've been able to do that and really kind of point out some key things that I truly think are important to getting this next generation up and running the right way. So I applaud you for putting the thought into it, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been a really, really fun conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, Jay. It's been a blast.
That wraps up another episode of Beyond the Wrench. If you like this episode, please show your support by rating and following the podcast. You can also watch the video interviews on WrenchWay's YouTube channel. Speaking of WrenchWay, Beyond the Wrench is managed and produced by the WrenchWay team. WrenchWay is dedicated to promoting and improving careers in the automotive, diesel, and collision industries. In partnership with ASE, we run the ASE Connects community, which empowers shops and dealerships with reliable data, school connections, and industry insights while helping grow the future technician workforce. You can learn more by visiting wrenchway.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.